Thank you to my panelists, my 5 distinguished panelists, and thank you to all of you experts in your own fields. My name is Christina, and I've got the big task of moderating this incredible panel of experts and providing, I hope, you with insight and information, encouragement, hopefully not despair, about this huge topic, which reads the Resolve panel, waste stream opportunities for creative circular system innovation. Before I allow my expert speakers to speak, I wanted to frame this convo for a couple of minutes to say that I first founded a non-profit nearly 20 years ago in Hong Kong, which is Asia-focused. It's called REDRESS, and it's working to promote the acceleration to a circular fashion industry. So I've possibly been banging on about circularity for 20 years. And this morning when I was in the shower, I thought, how on earth do I summarize such a complicated topic? And I suddenly remembered some calligraphy that I did when I was about 12 of a poem. So I'm going to read it to you. I called my mom today and said, give me that poem that I wrote, that I transcribed. So this is a poem to set us off. And my panelists don't know what I'm about to do, so they are possibly terrified. So this is the poem. 2 chambers has the heart, wherein dwell joy and sorrow. When joy awakes in one, then slumbers sorrow in the other. O joy, take care, speak softly, lest you awaken sorrow. So why am I talking about this poem? Because the poem is about the duality that lives in our heart of joy and sorrow. And as I was in the shower this morning thinking, how do we sum up the fashion industry? I thought that the fashion industry is a bit like our heart. There's a huge amount of sorrow going on, waste, pollution, carbon, and it's worsening, lack of circularity. And then at the same time, we also have this incredible joy. You are the joy. You are the joy. You set foot in this space and it gives you hope. We know that there's acceleration and that is the joy. So I want my panelists to scream joy today as we go through this topic. Now, each of my 5 panelists are actually exhibitors in the Resolve Lab, which is down there on the left. Make sure through the large doors on the left, make sure you go and check it out afterwards. It's a curated platform focused on circularity, of course, the clues in the title. It's mapping out waste opportunities with a view to highlight the value that is locked in discarded materials. So, 5 big brains, not much time. You've got the QR code. Get your questions ready. Off we go. We're going to have a quick fire introduction. Who are you and what is your waste that you are trying to resolve?
Hello, I'm Kenji Higashi from SPIBER. We are a company that makes protein fibers using plant-based feedstocks through a fermentation process. And today we use agricultural products like sugar from sugarcane or from corn as our feedstocks. But we're trying to shift towards using agricultural wastes and also using textile waste. If the textile is from a natural source like cotton or rayon or wool, we can use that as a feedstock.
We're going to come back to your process in a minute. So sugar moving to possibly textile waste for you as your waste source.
Hi everyone, I'm Sturgeon from the BIOMIMICRY Institute, and essentially what the Institute does is create an ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem from the inspiration on our Ask Nature platform through to innovation through our Ray of Hope Accelerator. And we're looking to basically get the innovation ecosystem working around learning from nature, so nature-inspired, bio-inspired innovation. There's a couple of great examples here. For example, Sparkle over in the first room there, where they've been inspired by a function or a system of nature, and then they've replicated that to solve a challenge, in this case with color.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Clara at SYSTEMIQ. I'm a director and lead of fashion and textiles work. And basically, we're a think tank and system change company, we call it. We're really there to achieve the Paris Agreement, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we just released a big report on textile recycling. So I'm happy to talk about that a bit more.
Fantastic. Yeah, we've got a big report to reveal in a moment.
Hi.
Moving on.
Yeah, Shahriare Mahmood from SPINNOVA. SPINNOVA has got a technology to produce the cellulosic fiber. It's basically starting from the pulp, and we produce the fiber in a very mechanical process. Not only the cellulosic feedstock, using the same technology, we can actually utilize the protein feedstock, meaning that, let's say, tannery waste. In the leather processing, the tannery, there are a lot of different kind of waste created, but specifically wet blue we can take and that converted also to a protein fiber. So we can utilize both, mainly cellulosic at the moment where we are working mainly, but also we can do the protein fiber.
Great. Shay?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Shay Sethi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of AMBERCYCLE. We're in a couple months celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We're based in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And I started AMBERCYCLE with my roommate from college. We wanted to solve the waste problem in fashion. We all have clothes in our closet, and we are looking to develop circular polyester for the apparel industry, currently scaling up.
Fantastic. And also for later, when you, or maybe you've already gone to see the Resolve Lab, exhibited in the space is the Circular Textile Foundation, Nanolume, Santis, and Bioculus. So take a look at that afterwards. And if we don't get through all of this panel, just to let you know that we're going to be over at the Resolve Lab afterwards. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into what our innovators and experts here think on this topic. I'm actually going to start with you, Shay. We're going back to you. 10-year birthday. Yeah?
Yes.
Great. I mean, you know, we've known each other for probably 10 years when we were both kids, right? Yep. Still, we are kids. So can you go into a bit more detail about what you do, please?
Yeah, so going back to 2015, 10 years ago when we started, my roommate and I graduated from college and we wanted to solve a very simple problem that we saw, which was the garbage bag of clothing in our closet.
Did you just call it a simple problem? It's quite loud up here. You called it a simple problem?
Yeah, very simple problem. Yeah, very simple problem.
Good.
And still think it's a simple problem. But
good.
The challenge that we had was there's a small bag of garments in our closet. How does this get recycled, and realized that it actually doesn't get recycled that much. And so we started investigating what is that material and where does it go? And we found very quickly that the material is mostly synthetics. Increasingly, polyester is the #1 material in fashion, and the usage of polyester is increasing really fast. And so we started with a very simple idea. Can we turn old t-shirts into new t-shirts? And over the years have developed a technology that separates molecules at the molecular level. This technology separates the polyester from the cotton, spandex, acrylic, nylon, etc. And the first product that we're making is Clara, which is a regenerated alternative to polyester. The material that we make is actually a chip or a resin, and then that material goes back into the supply chains to make yarns, fabrics, and garments for global brands and retailers, as well as designers who want to incorporate more sustainable materials into their products. Over the 10 years, we've learned a lot. There's 3 main components that we've really invested in. The first is collection. How do we get post-consumer garments out of people's closets and back into circulation? This has been a very exciting process. We started by in California collecting garments from In-N-Out, if you are all familiar, old aprons, etc., that we would drive to and collect the garments from. And we learned really quickly that there's a lot of complexity in post-consumer garment collection. And so developing a lot of the infrared scanning technology, upfront sorting that's required to then feed into what we've developed, which is a molecular separation process. It uses chemistry to separate the different molecules. And what we learned is that there's incredible complexity in the industry from a feedstock perspective, but that can all be managed using molecular technology, where the output is actually virgin quality and can be used just like a designer or a brand is using traditional polyester that comes from oil with much lower carbon footprint. And so that whole process has been really exciting. We've been really engaged with a lot of the brands and retailers towards scaling to really deliver impact to the industry.
Great. We're going to come back to scale in a minute, but I want to challenge you because you said it was simple, but then you've used a lot of complex words. And I know that's because the industry is complex. Your solution might be simple, but the industry is complex. Is that true?
Yeah, it's a very simple idea. And
complex.
There's a lot of logistics and issues with the day-to-day, but the concept is the same. It takes 20 years to change an industry, and we're on that journey.
Okay, who said that? You?
Today, yes. Yes.
Today?
Yes.
So
Still
says
late.
Shay, it takes 20 years. All right, cool. We'll quote you on that.
Fine.
All right, fantastic. Shahar,
Yeah.
speak to me. Tell us more about what you do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in our case, we are living in a very complex world, especially considering the textile industry. But our process is quite simple. So from that point of view, I think we are bringing the simplicity to the industry.
Okay.
So what we do basically that we take the pulp, and the pulp in very mechanical process, it's converted to a fiber. So what we do basically that the pulps are coming in general as a pulp sheet. We refine it, we produce, it's called microfibrillated cellulose. It's like a paste or lotion, and that we create a suspension that's just passing through the spinning nozzles, fiber spinning nozzle. That's our proprietary innovation. And when it's coming out, it's basically, it's go to a hot surface, it's a dryer, and that's evaporate the water. Basically, that's the simplicity that you get a suspension, it's passing through the nozzle. When it's coming out, it's basically a fiber, ready fiber, and it's collected in the filament level. The beauty of this technology is that we do not need any kind of a water process here, because as you perhaps noticed, we don't use any chemical process in this whole thing. So when we don't use any chemical process, we don't need also any water. Of course, in the suspension, there is some water, and that we need to evaporate, basically, and that's why we need this drying. But the whole process is, it's a mechanical process. And that's why we don't produce any wastewater. We don't produce also any solid waste in this whole process. So we can almost consider it as a waste-free process. And actually, we have a plant, it's called, we call it a demo industrial plant in Finland, central Finland. And that's when we have established that plant, we didn't need to get an environmental permit. Yeah. So, yeah.
When was this company founded?
It was 23 summer. We have
2023.
Yeah, when we have established this demo industrial unit. But we just celebrated our 10 years birthday.
Oh, wow.
You are going to do that, but we
Anyone else celebrating an anniversary, a birthday, anything else? Because we've got, many more. So 10 years?
Yeah.
What's the anniversary for 10 years?
I think it was it in January we have been.
Okay, good. Yeah, because it takes a lot of work. Apparently 20 years as defined today and agreed. So carrying on the material side, Kenji, do you want to just talk us through a little bit more about the detail of what you're doing, please?
Sure. So we have a fermentation process, which is very similar to what you do to make beer. So we have a factory in Thailand where we have huge stainless steel tanks that probably a little bit higher than this ceiling. And we put water in there. We put nutrient feedstocks in there, and our microbes will eat the nutrients. And instead of making alcohol in a beer factory, our process, the microbes make protein polymers, which we can then extract out of the fermentation solution, and we can then spin that into fibers using a process similar to what you would use to make man-made cellulose fibers. So we make a dope of the polymers, and we push it through a nozzle to make it into fibers. And one thing about our process is it's feedstock flexible. So today in Thailand, we mostly use sugar from sugarcane. We can use sugars from corn or other crops, but our ambition is to shift towards agricultural wastes, textile waste, anything biological origin. We can break it down into nutrients and feed that to our fermentation process. In Thailand, we've already started using agricultural waste, but the big challenge that we're tackling today is how can we use textile wastes at scale? One thing that we've noticed as we try to develop this process is that when, for example, if cotton is dyed or if it's treated with all sorts of chemicals, depending on the chemicals or dyes that you use, it can impact the efficiency of converting the cellulose into sugars, or for the efficiency of our microbes taking it in and eating it and converting it into protein polymers. So what we've done is we've created an alliance with many brands and manufacturers and dye companies and nonprofits in the textile industry to try to, together as an industry, figure out what kinds of chemicals, dyes, cause problems for SPIBER's recycling process. We're also actually opening up this alliance to other recycling technology companies so that they can also contribute by sharing with the industry what chemicals and dyes cause problems to their recycling technologies. So the goal is to create a shared database that will allow product designers to know which dyes they should be using if they want their products to be compatible with all sorts of different recycling technologies.
So where is the shared database?
It's
moment?
it's
Where is it?
online. So if you come over to our booth at the lab area near the entrance, we can share a QR code to our website. It's biocircularmaterials.org, and that's where we have the first version of the database. Today it's still a very early version, so we only have a few data sets in there, but our ambition is to bring in more and more members into this alliance and to together create a shared resource that we can all use to design for circularity.
I love that you've used the word ambition quite a few times. I've written it and circled it, and we all need ambition because of, the challenges. But my question is, why move from beer and sugar fermentation and making beer, if you were involved in the business then, to a new challenge, which is so unbelievably complex, of textile waste? Why did you do that?
Well, so there's finite land which we can use for agriculture. Of course, our fibers are protein fibers, and they have lots of similarities with wool and silk and cashmere, animal-based fibers. Animal-based fibers require huge amounts of land to grow the animals and to harvest the fibers. Our process, even if we use sugar from sugarcane or from corn, we use a fraction of the resources compared to animal farming, but we're still using valuable land. And many of our customers, the big brands, including many of the members of the Alliance, they like the fact that we don't need to use animals which use huge amounts of land and produce methane, but they also want to avoid using precious agricultural land.
So in that sense, then, the obviousness, I believe, unless I'm really missing the point here, is that waste stream is an opportunity. Textile waste is an actual added opportunity for you, moving away from sugar, beer, etc.
Yes, absolutely. There's huge potential. One big challenge here is the cost of waste-based or cellulose-based sugars is a lot more expensive today compared to conventional edible sugars. But this is, I think, as we create more demand for waste-derived sugars, that price difference should
Well,
shrink.
we're going to get to scale and money in a minute, because that's always the party pooper. Okay, so Amanda, please take us through more of, the complexity of what you're doing, and to give more insight to our audiences that would help them, please.
Yeah, so I mentioned that BIOMIMICRY Institute focuses on learning from nature's genius. So the project that we are working on at the moment with the Loudest Foundation and with three partners, Circle Economy, Beneficial Design Institute, and the Orr Foundation in Ghana, is called The Nature of Fashion. And essentially what we have done with that project, we've done a 3-year kind of research phase, and we're now in the first year of the 3-year implementation phase. So the first phase was looking at these 3 pilots, so 2 in the global north and 1 in the global south. I'm sure many of you are familiar that a lot of the fashion waste from Europe ends up in Ghana, in Accra, in Kantamantu market. So that's where our global south implementation partner, Orr Foundation, is based. And essentially what our project is doing is looking at how does nature decompose into basically nutrients. How does it keep sort of the nutrient cycle going? Obviously, we've gotten very far with our fashion waste being so complex and so mixed from thinking about it as nutrients. But as you were saying, nature would break down any kind of complex waste through a series of bacterial or enzymatic processes into essentially nutrients again. So our 2 pilots that are now in the implementation phase in Berlin and Rotterdam have basically used an enzymatic process, so mimicking nature's decomposition pathways, to create glucose from fashion waste. And our implementation partner in the Global South, it's a very different context. In the Global North, they can partner with regional municipalities in Rotterdam and Berlin and start looking at how we might, have decomposition facilities as municipal systems, essentially. There's 12.6 billion euros a year that the EU spends on managing textile waste. What if some of that came into decomposition facilities, for example? But the solution in the Global South is very different. In Accra, there's no big municipality engagement, lack of infrastructure. So actually the solution there is decentralized, looking at essentially small bioreactors that can put bacteria to work. And given that the lagoon in Accra has been so severely polluted from the fashion waste washing in, there's actually the need for resource there is clean water. So from their process, they think they can get to clean water, which is the resource needed. So I think it gives you an example of how nature may have different solutions of what it decomposes it to, and we can learn from that in order to say what is the resource needed in these different areas by decomposing fashion waste. So we're now in the we've gone through the proof of concept. We've shown it's possible. By engaging with partners like the Yale Center for Green Chemistry and doing a lot of analysis. And now we're into the how do we get this implemented so we can pivot from incineration and other mechanisms of what we're doing with our fashion waste into actually recovering nutrients from it through decomposition.
And is there other research in this area elsewhere in the world? Already done?
There is some research around how do we take waste, especially, for example, like trimming waste through production and create it into, new supplies. But not a lot. What we're trying to do is get to that municipal place before it gets shipped and also identify the different ways that decomposition can create useful nutrients for that region. And so as far as we know, no, that's not being done elsewhere. This is very much a research concept project.
We've got another global first here, so said me. I just was staggered by that 12.6 billion that the EU spends on
managing waste from textiles. So there's incineration, there's shipping, there's sorting facilities, etc. And with obviously the new regulations, the EPR coming in, where fashion suppliers will need to pay fees based on the quantity in their region. We think the economics are also going to change quite quickly because incineration costs are going up. There's becoming more limits on where you can ship waste to. And also there'll be hopefully incentives through the EPR fund that will support innovative waste treatment systems. So we're really interested in terms of scaling and redirecting that funding, that cost right now into creating, if you like, useful outputs. That's the EU context, of course. Ghana, again, is a very different context. And our partner, Ore Foundation, they're not advocating for fashion waste to stop coming into Kantamantu market. It's actually a very thriving social economic system. It's just that the process by which they get bales, they don't know what's in them, and much of that cannot be sold, then just gets thrown into the lake and the ecosystems. So having markets that can resell clothing is a great initiative that we'd want to still see going. It's just that more and more clothing we're seeing not being able to be resold. It couldn't even be rags. Much of it is really, there's nothing we can do with it at that point. And the mountains of that are increasing.
Yeah. Terrifying. You've given me the most beautiful segue I could possibly have asked.
I was going to say that. Thanks, Amanda.
I mean, thank you. You really over to you, Clara.
Thank you. SYSTEMIQ is turning 10 this year, so there you've got another
birthday.
So as I said, we just released a study on textile to textile recycling. There's report cards in the Resolve Lab area. If you want to grab one, take it home. There's a link to the actual report and everything. But maybe just to set the context a little bit, and then we're going to talk about some of the conclusions. What we did is we brought together multi-stakeholder steering groups, 17 organizations across the value chain, including some of the key NGOs, so recyclers, collectors, sorters, brands, and that's sort of been chaired by an academic. And we really looked at what would it take to create a tipping point for textile to textile recycling. And we used the case of polyester waste in Europe. And we're talking there about post-consumer. So just to give that as context, because I think it's important to understand also some of the learnings and implications. So working with post-consumer and in Europe with that policy angle. But what do we mean by tipping point? We've done at SYSTEMIQ quite a few tipping point analyses where we look at basically what does it take for clean technology or low carbon solution to get out of niche status? Because what we're seeing is that technology typically don't scale like this linearly. They tend to scale more like an S-curve fashion or like this from the audience perspective. So slow growth and then suddenly it takes off.
So that's really good news actually for many people in the room.
So the tipping point is really where that inflection point, right? Like where do we get from the incremental slow growth into exponential growth? And the methodology that we developed with the University of Exeter looks at how do we trigger such tipping points? And there's really three conditions that it breaks down into and that we looked at in the study. One is affordability. So it really, that's the money question, right? The relative unit economics. And we looked at using a depolymerization process to recycle polyester waste from post-consumer waste in Europe versus virgin polyester in Asia, where the majority of that value chain sits, and we compared the unit economics and calculated that. And I'll tell you what we got found out in a minute. But it's sort of affordability test, accessibility test. So in this case, this is a lot about the upstream and downstream supply chain integration, or in the sense of, in the case of post-consumer waste, the feedstock, right? The waste management systems, the sorting systems, the feedstock scaling, as well as then the supply chain integration into the yarn makers and so forth, all the way to the brands. And the third test is about attractiveness, which is really, in the case of raw materials or fibers, is really about quality, performance, environmental standards, and so forth. And and maybe just to summarize, the objective was really to see how can we get out of this 20-year, and I like that you brought it up because someone else has brought it up with us in the past, 20-year very slow growth pattern, and really see a shift in adoption, and we're really thinking mass adoption because, as you said, Amanda, we're still seeing too much waste not going into value, and less than 1% of the total fiber mix is coming from recycled textile waste, right? So that's where we really want to see the shift. And at the same time, in Europe, there's really important policy decisions being made in the course of this year and the coming years that are setting the guardrails for how the system will come about.
Okay, well, let's stick with you then on policy, seeing as that I think is obviously one of the big pushes of to accelerate the whole transition that we're all begging for. Can you give us an update on policy from your reports or from your knowledge, please? And by the way, it's come up on every panel, so
I'm going to bring it back to sort of what did we find in the analysis, and it really in the context that I gave, Europe, post-consumer polyester and depolymerization technologies without policy. From our analysis, the business case will not work, and I think that's quite a key takeaway, because I think there's an understanding more generally that with just enough scale and just enough demand, and it will somehow work.
And everyone's nodding, right? So clearly, everyone nodding policy. I mean, I don't know which panel, I've been here all day, but we're begging, screaming. Oh, it was Tiff said, "Come on!" I liked what she said. It made me giggle. Like, if there's anyone in policy here, could you get on with your job? And I'm copying Tiff there. Keep going.
And I like what you said, Kenji, about it's surprising that using post-consumer waste is more expensive than using virgin inputs, and it's the same with polyester. And we found about a 2.6x cost gap. 2.6x is a lot. that is not a premium that most or the majority of the market would be able to absorb today. And that's where we then looked at how can you reduce the cost gap, how can you bring that closer to parity. The scaling alone, so like the economies of scale and production, just building bigger production facilities are not going to cut it alone to close the gap. And that's where the policy part comes in. And there's three things that we really want to highlight, or we really looked at in the report, and we're sharing more details there. It's one around the EPR policy, Amanda, that you mentioned. It's about how is that EPR system designed. That's coming into implementation now in Europe for all member states by 2028. But there's questions about what targets are being set, and especially what fee levels are being set, and how's the money being spent, right? And so there's a risk that you collect a whole bunch of money, but you don't quite make the business case work, and you don't end up achieving the overall objective. And what we've seen in the Netherlands, some proposals out there in terms of the EPR fees, from our understanding or our analysis, are falling short of this. So there's a risk we're building an insufficient system on the EPR side. And then secondly, ESPR, so that's the legislation now being worked on at the European Commission level. We had meetings in Brussels to discuss this with the policy officers there. There's the questions around recycled content mandates, which we think are really, really key to enable the system so that all of the industry has a mandate actually to incorporate recycled materials from textile waste into their product, over time increasing, but something we really think needs to be there from a policy perspective, as well as eco-design standards, and how can we design products so they're more easily recyclable. And there's other aspects to eco-design, of course, with regards to durability and so forth, but designing for recycling is quite important in this case. And then just the last one also, to your point, Amanda, trade rules, like sounds banal, but it's actually really quite key. And to sort of what are the products or wastes that we're allowing to flow outside of the European Union, and there needs to be a lot more clarity actually on that. So again, something the European Commission is working on this year.
So are you positive about the progress of this policy? Are you positive about how fast and how accurate it's going to be and when it's going to come?
I'm positive in the sense that it's on the agenda, the working groups are happening. Yeah. We had some really good discussions in Brussels, as I said, last week. I think there's still a lot of steps to be taken for the industry, actually also all of the industry, to influence and ask for ambitious policy, especially on the side on recycled content mandates, and also for that EPR implementation to be done in an effective way.
Yeah, because it's very bewildering sitting on the outside of policy and trying to read stuff. It changes all the time. You can't keep up with it. You know, it's quite bewildering and mildly depressing. So thank you for giving us some clarity. Yes?
No. I think the EPR, what it is doing is putting a shockwave through the brands, because yes, each European country could define it differently, what the collection looks like, what the money is used for, you know, how they sort of, you know, deliver on the fund and the objectives. So certainly I've spoken to brands who are like, you know, can we just fund the project you're doing? Like, we'd rather just sort of fund decomposition, you know, facilities versus thinking about each country separately. And so I think there's definitely the devil is in the details in terms of how that gets implemented in each country. But it's already, I think, putting a bit of a sort of shockwave through brands who are thinking about, how do they take responsibility for the waste component, which is good.
And staying on policy and linking to scale, I'd like to ask our three gentlemen with the innovation businesses and materials, etc. If you're speaking to investors, how much of this policy is helping to get your money in the door to actually scale up? How much are you leveraging off this upcoming policy to grow your businesses, if at all? Anyone?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we've been really fortunate to be able to work with some of the biggest brands in Europe, America, and also Asia. And across the board, it's the regulatory impending ruling, but also the planning for regulation that has enabled brands to start to think about how they can start participating in the solution. So across the feedstock collection, infrastructure establishment, and then also on the product side with the supply chain integration and brand building, how does this actually work? I think one of the things that we've really observed is across the board, there is an understanding that circularity needs to happen, and it's really in the details, going line by line with raw material suppliers, the infrastructure that's required to establish it, and then committed agreements where brands are saying, hey, if you build the infrastructure, we will pay for the product. And this is starting to happen across the industry. I'm really excited to see a lot of our peers also develop these relationships with brands, because in order to deploy significant capital into establishing these facilities, raw material sourcing has to be established, supply chain relationships have to be airtight, and then the commitment to the brand has to also be built. And then I will say one of the most interesting things that we've learned is on the brand side, developing customer touch points to establish a communication tool for consumers and people. So we've invested in our Psychora brand quite a bit as we work with brands and retailers. How do we educate people who want to walk in the door and understand that garments that they're buying are actually good for the world around them? So we've invested quite a bit in the supply chain, going through a tiered supply chain as these raw materials go to yarns, fabrics, garments, shipped to then be delivered to customers. How does that whole thing work such that traceability can be built from the ground up? Because we are building a new supply chain, and that creates an opportunity to kind of build it in a way that is fully traceable, which is very exciting.
I'm still laughing because he said at the beginning he had a simple solution, and it sounds very complex now. We're going to talk about scale, and I want to talk about money. I'm going to put you all on the spot to find out who's making money. So you can prepare yourselves if you want to answer the question. But I just want to come to you two to see, do you want to talk about how policy is helping to push investment and therefore scaling into your respective businesses, or not? Maybe not.
I think in our case, we do see lots of big brands. They obviously they know these policies are coming, and they are trying to take action. But when it comes to ourselves scaling our technology, we really need offtake commitments, long-term, large-scale commitments, so that we can build up our capacity, bring our price down, and bringing the price down helps create more demand.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what triggers exponential growth.
So offtake agreements is what you need right now to scale.
That's what we need, and policy is pushing in the right direction,
Yeah.
but it's not pushing hard enough,
Yeah.
and it's not giving a clear financial incentive to brands to make them be able to have the courage to
actually put their hand in their pocket, pay up. Yeah, is that fair enough to say they've got to buy it? Yeah, and I know it's not, I mustn't get angry. I know it's complicated. Yeah, so you need offtake agreements. I'm assuming you probably do too.
Yeah, we do. In fact, I would highlight that, of course, policy is something we really need, especially for the innovation space, to scale it up. And we want to see that, okay, through the policy, there is a natural pressure created, and this kind of new innovative products being adopted by the brands and especially by the industry. But one thing probably I think we really need to work on is the collaborative approach. This is, to me, key. For example, if you see the journey of SPINNOVA in these 10 years, I think I must say, as I am having the background from the industry, textile industry, and working for the brands also, what I have seen that in this short period, I would say 10 years is a short period for such kind of innovation. We have been seeing the lab scale, we have seen the pilot scale, even we have been establishing a factory of 1 kiloton capacity in 2023. So basically in 8 years, we have been able to establish a factory. So I think the pace is not bad in this.
Yeah.
But what we are at the moment, if you really ask that where we are facing the challenge in scaling up, is basically if the market is ready to pay the premium. You know, when there is an early stage innovation, there is definitely, and I'm myself a chemical engineer, so I know that process efficiency to build for a new technology, new innovation, new process, you really need time.
And money.
And money, of course.
Yeah.
But if I just see from the engineering perspective, even it needs time. So I think that time we are not being allowed. The expectation is that we will perform in the same par with the conventional one. So I think we need a collaborative approach. it's not that we're just saying that brands will be helping. The industry also, the textile industry, and the knowledge share, it is very important.
Yeah.
So I think what we are approaching right now at SPINNOVA, that we are trying to build a consortium where we would really like to bring the knowledge from all the sides. So the technology suppliers, means, for example, we are the innovator, but there are specific chunk of the equipment, let's say, so we need the innovation from their side also, or in order to reduce the production cost and also the investment cost. Also from the brand side, industry side, to bring their knowledge in order to really scale it up to the commercial level.
I've got an unpopular question, but many people are saying, "Oh, we've got all the research. We don't need any more PhDs. We don't need any more studies being done." Apologies to my friends in the middle. And you're saying collaboration. We know that we need collaboration, and you're saying we need research. So, do we need any more research, or do we need money and policy and scaling up? I mean, you obviously would say yes. There's more information to be known. You're shaking your head.
I think research, of course, needed. It's just a continuous improvement process for the future. I think we are not stopping here. Let's say the innovations that already been in this space, this is great, but I'm sure we want to improve it more.
Okay.
So for that, I think we need really research, but we need action for these already in the market.
Absolutely, Clara.
And at the risk of generalizing here, I think in terms of the technological research, we're seeing a lot of technologies are at the brink of being able to scale and taking that last sort of final step. And it's more about now getting the all the components that come together.
Yeah.
Take all policy, but it's got to be the demand from somewhere.
Do you want to add?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, I mean, it really is all about policy rather than anything else. I mean, and that's because for us, the decomposition, the waste that absolutely no one can do anything with, even if we transform the supply chain, we reuse everything we can, and we're creative with all of the amazing innovations in this room. We will still be left because of the quantity and the quality of the garments currently with stuff we cannot do anything else with. And so it's nobody wants to talk about that last piece or about the concept of decomposing. It's not very sexy. It's not,
You
very
make it
like
sexy,
fun
darling,
and
honestly.
joyful, So I think for us, it's got to be policy and regulation that ends up driving that last component.
Okay, but I want to talk about money now, and I'm not going to ask your valuations. But can you? How much of your business is worth? How much have you raised? Are you allowed to tell us? Is it in the public domain? Do you have enough money? Do you want some money? Yep.
Yeah, we need scale. So, I mean,
We need money. Everyone needs money. Does everyone need money out here? Yeah.
Money.
Everyone wants money. Have you got enough, Shay?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been fortunate to raise 50 million US to date, but getting the offtake contracts, getting the feedstock contracts, working with the supply chain, there's a lot of little pieces that have to come together. There's a lot of money in this world, and if the entire chain is set up to really work for everyone, then the proof is that money is available across multiple types of investors.
Are you squashing lots of your competitors?
Squashing.
Well, you've got the power. Are you the market for your particular area?
I mean, apparel is a very large industry, and so what the feeling that I've had since day one with my co-founder is that bag of clothing that you have in the closet, there's a lot of components there, and we have to collaborate across the different partners that are in the industry. We need successes. And I think when I reference that 20-year journey, it's important to keep the momentum up as we go through this S-curve, which I totally agree with. It takes time, and the industry is working really hard to get to that point, and we're on the journey. So for us, it's really exciting to see a lot of our peers in the industry really also do really well.
So it sort of makes me think of the two chambers of the heart. The joyful heart needs time and money. Yeah?
But in the money, I think I would like to highlight that there is a jump needed. For example, I think there are investment, there are money in the journey up to that you're proving that the technology works, the product great. Then you need a big leap.
Yeah.
That's, I think, I don't know how many of the innovator in this room has got that level. So that, I think, in a different level of money we are talking about.
Okay, good. I've got 2 questions, 1 minute. Shay, how are you finding the shifting appetite for circularity, specifically within the context of the US market?
It's a really good question. I come from LA, very familiar with the American market. It's a desire that transcends just the end brand. The supply chain that supplies a lot of the American companies also supplies companies in Europe and Asia. And it's not just one company that's going to drive the entire change. The supply chain, the end brands, and then the consumers are incredibly important. And this might just be the California bias, but in Los Angeles, people want to buy sustainable garments. And this is something that over the past 10 years, there's been ups and downs in the macro environment, but the overall trend has been very strong. We want the circularity to work at scale, and we're on that journey.
Brilliant. Okay, and final question for anyone who wishes to. Are there any new innovations in using leather production waste streams like trimmings, buffing dust, etc.?
We are not using the trimmings, but we, as I said, the leather processing waste, which is called wet blue, that we can convert to protein fiber. I think that's a real problem for the tannery industry, and we can convert to a gold.
So you're our leather expert on the panel. Yeah. No one else? Anyone else on leather want to add?
So we haven't been able to use it yet, but it's a natural material. It's made of proteins mostly. So theoretically, we should be able to break it down into nutrients and feed it to fermentation. That's something that we hope to do. We're not there yet, but hopefully we'll be there soon.
So when we meet, in how many years will you have done it with your ambition?
Ambition, hopefully in a year or two, we'll have done it at least at small scale.
We're going to check in, and that's part of the Resolve Lab, is to provide this encouragement and on all of your journeys. So thank you all so very, very much for sharing your wisdom and your enthusiasm and your joy with the audience. Thank you all so very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.